Okay. So the fourth thesis is all about the problem of consciousness, right? And when we speak about the problem of consciousness, we speak about phenomenology. But we have to still remember or put in our minds that the thesis number four is a continuation of the Cartesian problem. And thesis number four takes a swipe actually on the problem with the cogito ergo sum. The problem is known as the unipolar consciousness of the cogito ergo sum. In other words, Descartes' cogito is accused of being unipolar or close. Therefore, it is solipsistic. Diba? Because remember, Descartes, for Descartes, the first certitude is that the self exists. But the self is only the realization of the existence of the self is a byproduct of syllogism, right? Remember that the syllogism first was, I think, or first is I doubt, right? I doubt, but doubting is thinking. Therefore, I think, and thinking is a property of existence. Therefore, I exist. So cogito, I think. Therefore, I am. There is a logical pattern. There is a syllogistic pattern that can be deduced or established prior to the attainment of that certitude. So Descartes was certain that he existed. And that is the problem according to some. Because for some, that, that admission or that arrogation of Descartes is close to being solipsistic. Kana bang I alone exist, right? Or I can only be so certain of myself. Remember, mo ba yun ang ibuhat ni Descartes, di ba? Yung siya, God is, you can doubt everything, but you cannot doubt the condition under which you are doubting, that is, you exist. So I exist, and that's the first certainty. So you may doubt everything else. Mo nang solipsistic siya. I alone, I can only be certain of my own existence. Mo na giingon ni Descartes. But the fourth thesis speaks of the Husserlian correction to this Cartesian erratic ba na? Or erroneous, or it's a correction of the Cartesian cogito. Okay, if to think is an activity of consciousness or of the mind, because we cannot say that thinking is mind. Diba? Kaya nga natin nga, thinking is an activity of the consciousness or of the mind. Now that's already another level of discussion. That's phenomenology. Phenomenology is a science of consciousness. Remember, right? And thinking of something is a phenomenological profession. Mo nang ingon si Descartes, ingon si Husserl rather nga, if the mind thinks of itself, it holds itself as an object of its contemplation, di ba? I am thinking of myself. I am certain about myself, di ba? You hold yourself as an object. But at the same time, Descartes did not actually close the possibility of another object. That is, him or the cogito thinking of something else. May that something be imaginary or real. Depends, right? So the idea there is that for the four theses, there is now a need to examine the condition or the status of consciousness. So while Descartes says that we can only be so certain about ourselves, Edmund Husserl, who is the father of phenomenology, modern phenomenology, claims that actually the default consciousness condition is that it is always conscious of something. Consciousness is always conscious of something. One phenomenological thesis, right? So, while Descartes says you can only be so certain about our own selves, so we becoming conscious of our own self, right? That is, consciousness is always conscious of something. May that thing be yourself or something else, right? So, ang thesis number 4, time and again, says many contemporary philosophers do not make the otherness of the other a problem, right? Because the other is so co-immediate with consciousness. As Husserl says, consciousness is always consciousness of something. We are always beings in the world or beings in a situation. So while Descartes problematized the consciousness or cogito so much, other philosophers that came after Descartes almost rejected that kind of a problem. Although they considered it as a valid philosophical issue. Kana bang idea nga, is the cogito then solipsistic, right? Because it can only know itself. So na comments from other philosophers which says it cannot be it cannot only be about itself because consciousness thinking as an activity is always thinking of something. So now the reality of the other is now bridged, right? Is now bridged if not achieved or reached or realized. All right, so the fourth thesis, time and again, is a thesis on phenomenology. The father of phenomenology was Edmund Husserl, who also was the mentor of Hannah Arendt and Martin Heidegger. The mentor of Martin Heidegger. Now, phenomenology is a science of consciousness, and consciousness is not a bipolar. It's a bipolar stuff because it is always about the other, right? It's always about the other. The good thing about phenomenology is that there were existential phenomenologists who, went by the name of Martin Buber, diba? And isa pa tong uban. Daghang to mga phenomenologists nga existentialists but at the same time. And instead of thinking only of the other as an object or the other as a thing, they would treat the primary other as a human person, your neighbor as your other, right? So your neighbor as the other. But okay, that's besides the point because Husserl talked about phenomenology in a very abstract manner. In fact, if you happen to come across with a book titled Idead or Ideas, you encounter there key concepts such as phenomenological position, which is, of course, always for Husserl, a transcendental perception. That is a kind of a perception that goes beyond and above or over and above the naturalistic perception of an object. So, for some or for naive thinking or naive looking at things, we only look at things, right? We only look at things at how they are being placed in the classroom or on a particular space, and they call that naturalism, diba? Usually, if we use our perception, we encounter objects, and we don't only encounter objects, but we also encounter like other realities who also have the same consciousness as ours. In other words, when we look at each other, we don't only look at each other as objects, but this kind of looking entails an acceptance that you guys also behave the way I do. If I look at you as a human person, as an object that is capable of thinking or at the same time conscious of something else, then I know that you would also like think or feel the same, right? So human beings are special in the phenomenological field because we are the only being that are conscious of what's going on. And in ideas, even Husserl spoke about open phenomenological data. For Husserl, the conscious individual, who is the cogito of Descartes, right? We have to always remember that Husserl did not reject the cogito of Descartes. What Husserl did was he brought the cogito up to the transcendental level so that the cogito does not only see objects like tables or chairs, but in the Husserlian phenomenology, the cogito can now see the essence of this that appears to him. right? So instead ba we only look at the tables or computer, laptop, or cell phone, the Husserlian cogito now is able to see the essence of this kind of a table. But this essence is not something given. Okay? The good thing about the cogito of Husserl is that it does not talk about its preconceived essence or prefabricated essence like chair or its chairness, di ba? Kaya ang traditional metaphysics guide, what makes a chair is its chairness. Right? Pero kang Husserl nga perspective, dili na nainana. The essence of a chair would now differ or would now become multiple. Daghang multiple essences ba? And that is the reason why, and that is how he looked at it. And through the concept he calls epoche or phenomenological bracketing. Familiar mo ng epoche? Concept or bracket, di ba? Kumano mo phenomenology, di ba? Ha? You can hear mo phenomenology, di ba? Abot mo ng discussion of epoche. Epoche ba? Bracket. Okay. For Husserl, it's one thing that we guys can see each other, right? We can perceive each other, we can see each other, and whatnot. And there's also a possibility that when I perceive you in such a way that your essences or your identities are already given to me, di ba? But in phenomenology, what is being offered is a new look at things, so that things become different. So the idea is that phenomenology, time and again, which is a science of consciousness, offers the possibility of a renewal of an essence by bracketing the biases and setting them aside. Mawala na nga si Edmund Husserl's kanang phenomenological method ni Husserl was also used by Pope John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła. Kaya naman, if you employ that phenomenological method of Husserl, you will now start to appreciate people, di ba? Kay usually kung natay bias we start with our bias at looking. When we start with our biases while looking at other people or persons or human beings, now contain na kita ng essence na, di ba? Kaya dito, kawatan, subugan, go, na ito. But then if we bracket them, put them in a box, and then set them aside, we will now be able to see the person as it appears to us now, or as that person appears to you now. So there is now a possibility of that person becoming somebody else, right? Kana bang biasless nga looking at things. And when you are no longer biased, you are transcending. Diba? Mo na itawag ko, ang phenomenological method ni Husserl is one that does not stop at the mere acceptance that an object exists, but it actually goes beyond that acceptance. It goes beyond that. It transcends by setting aside its preconceptions and looking at things at how they appear to the individual at present. That's epoche. And it's the same method that Martin Heidegger used in Being and Time. For Heidegger, truth is relative to how things appear. While there is truth for Heidegger, truth is not prefabricated. It is relative to how it appears to you in such a way. And in fact, Heidegger quoted Husserl in the opening pages of the book, which is again called Being and Time. In fact, he dedicated his book to his mentor, Edmund Husserl. The idea there was that the book Being and Time was supposedly written as a phenomenological offering to his mentor, as an offering ba to his mentor. It turned out that the book was translated into something that is called existential phenomenological manner or outlook, because Heidegger eventually ended up While Heidegger tried to trace the development of consciousness without through Husserl, he ended up saying that man is being in the world, and that being in the world is the host of different kinds of truth or truth conditions or phases that appear to that man in a particular way. So Heidegger eventually brought to the subjective level the condition of epistemology. While for Husserl, ingon siya, nga ang truth about something that reveals to your consciousness can be established in a transcendental, objective manner. Diba? If you set aside your biases against that person or that object, you'll be able to attain an objective, right? Truth about that object. Heidegger says, yeah, maybe, but actually it is not the case because that truth that reveals to you will be exclusively meaningful to you in such a way that is meaningful to you, but may not be any more meaningful to somebody else. In that case, truth becomes subjective. And he borrowed the term aletheia, right? Aletheia as truth, which is the revelation of being to you. Instead of the mind, instead of the cogito trying to understand it, right? Okay, look at this. The difference now is, for Husserl, the cogito constructs, right? The truth about an object of existence. While for Heidegger, it is that object that which carries its own truth that appeals to your mind. So meaning or truth is not created, but it's something that appeals to your mind. So that's a difference, right? Ang Husserl kay, you set aside the bias and you will be able to transcend. So na yung mga categories of thought or of ideas that you can use to evaluate an object in a phenomenological way. But for Heidegger, it's the other way around. That object, that phenomenon or being, will appear to you in a very specific way. And that is one of the rationale that he used for defending Nazism. When his student Herbert Marcuse wrote a letter to Heidegger questioning his involvement with the Nazis, Heidegger was actually confronted with 3 questions by Marcuse. But he responded, one of his responses stated that, how do you put this? That Nazism appeared to him in such a way that it carries a truth for nationalism. So that was one of his defense. He used this kind of phenomenology to defend Nazism. So the contrast now is, while Descartes, okay, now we have 3 thinkers, diba? Descartes, Husserl, and Heidegger. Now the difference is Descartes seemed to be solipsistic, right? He says, I can only be certain that I doubt, therefore I exist, I think. But Husserl says, consciousness is always about, you doubting or thinking is always about something else. So there is no priority now. The mind, the cogito is not anymore prioritized. Remember Descartes prioritized the cogito, di ba? Ang objective external world is only a certitude. But Husserl kind of like eliminated the priority. The mind cannot exist without the object. Maybe that's the point. For Husserl, consciousness cannot exist as an objective entity without the object. They always go hand in hand. Katong theory ni Aquinas, correspondence theory of truth, remember? Remember mo na? Epistemology. Theory of mind meeting reality. Without, diba? Mind, reality. Now, something is true if truth is when mind meets with reality, right? Na yung mga correspondence nga dimensions ba? But then again, gikuha ang priority from the Cartesian cogito and he moves siya to an equal point. But then still, truth is objective. But for Heidegger, no, truth is what appears to you. One famous example of Heidegger is kanang lightning in the middle of the Black Forest. Kana ba ito magkilat gabi? When you are, there's a region in Germany where Heidegger goes every time he is disposed to write, or he predisposed himself to write books or whatever by going to that province. And there is this province called Black Forest. And yeah, ingon siya, in that province, at night it's really dark. There are no kind of lights, no electricity, no lamps, whatever. But when lightning strikes, you can see a certain region. A certain part of the dark forest is revealed by the lightning. Truth is like that. A certain portion of big region of reality is revealed. Only to you. Okay, for example, if nakakadiri sa region sa Black Forest, niya nadiri ako sa, and when lightning strikes, you can only see this part of the forest, right? Ito nasa picas parts of forest will now have a different view. So truth reveals to us in a specific manner. Even if it reveals to everyone, like in the case of what? In the case of Christ coming to, or Christ or God becoming man, but that is still, but that or look at the phenomenon of Christ, for example. It reveals, its revelation is multidimensional, right? For some, Christ was the promised Messiah. For some, he was a rebel. For some, he was just another zealot or kanabitong kanang pretend nga kuan lagi yan. It's like ibuloy, di ba? For us Catholics, ridiculous, right? But for his fanatics, he is the son of the appointed Son of God. For some, they don't care, right? So the revelation of being or of truth is relative, according to Heidegger. Anyway, but still, there is this meeting between consciousness and truth. Ang nakalaya lang kay, again, while Descartes and Husserl made the cognito actively seek or establish the truth, Heidegger waited for its revelation. Ano ba ito? Baliktad ba? Mo na yung nakalahin nila. But then, we can actually expound thesis number 4 and drag it to a longer, far wider context. But, mo limit lang taan na kay sila mo po na bitaw kanang tawagan forerunner of phenomenology. Descartes, Husserl, and Heidegger. Okay. Kaya pwede magamingon nga consciousness, malinaw. But then, eventually, according to Freud, Nietzsche, and Marx, wala mong consciousness. Diba? The lie of consciousness. For Freud, wala mong consciousness na ay id, ego, and id, ego, and ito mo sa? Super ego ba to? Oh yeah? Id, ego, and the super ego, di ba? And there is no such thing as intact identity. The human person is always broken from the inside. Okay. Anyway, we will not touch that kay di man po na mo point sa thesis number 4. All right. That is why in the fifth thesis, nabasin ka na to? Wala naman yung bag, muli na korto. So the fifth thesis is wala silver, no? Ilan tawa ko na pala ba nagbabas sa Realmar dito sa parlor? Parlor ba tawag na lounge. Kung dito sa registrar bitaw, wala man yung bag, naglakaw na korto. Atong sulod, atong buwan, atong paliw. Pero ang fifth thesis is actually a continuation of the discussion of Heidegger. Look at this. The irreducible cognitional beginning cannot be the self-established against its objects, right? So it's not the cogito, right? The idea there is that the cogito is not the priority. It's not the irreducible beginning. Diba? It's not the cogito established against an object. The way of the one. Ako na rin, hindi ko sa consciousness, di ba? Dahil, nauna din ako dito. Nag-share. Although, nag-consultation sila. Wala, dahil na. Ganun nga, nag-ulit-ulit lang sa mga chicks. So, kinsa may ganang bagay kong laking abdo? Sige, ganang bagay. Oh, picture. So, yan na niya. Okay, ang thesis number 5, look at this. Number 5 ug number 4, mo na kung ingon ganina nga ang number 4 katong kang Husserl ingon niya nga the cogito is not the priority anymore, di ba? Ang cogito, the subject is not the irreducible beginning, dili na may priority pa. And it's wrong to insist na mas importante ang consciousness kaysa sa object. Okay, time and again, if or should consciousness exist, it must exist alongside objects. So consciousness is always consciousness of something. Walay consciousness nga mag-exist in itself alone. Okay, mo na ang pasabot ng first line, tanawa. Diba? The irreducible cognitional beginning cannot be the self established against its object. Dili pwedeng self lang. Dapat kung may self, may object. It is the question, right? The question about appearance. Wala na? Ano pa? Ano sa man siya? Sige, alingan pa ito siguro. May result. What siya? What pag niya no? Di mo maman ani. Ito lang nuwato ning kuan. Sige. Okay na mag-4 ta? Kinapon siya gampon na ba? Okay, so I was saying, sige suga ba? Okay. Ngit-ngit niyo mga copies. Okay, so I was saying that ang 50 C's is what we said earlier nga it tries to dismantle this myth of consciousness as an independent reality. Again, consciousness is not the priority. So kana mga bright lagi mo about unsa, di ba? Mo na bright ko, ana mo na balang pero remember nga you cannot arrogate on that kay kung ang phenomenological question kay unsa man ka nga bright, di ba? Unsa man mo nahibalaan di ay, right? Unsa man nahibalaan mo nga di po na mo mahibalaan, pareha ra man ng consciousness, right? Okay. So the question about appearance, reality is raised by a subject who is himself a questioning existence. I am the question. I exist questioningly and opening to being. I am the scene of the disclosure. I think this is now what they call the existential phenomenology. So from consciousness to I, right? From consciousness to I, me. I am the beginning. I am what enables this meeting between consciousness and reality. Mo nang kadang question sa libro ni Quine ba to or isa tong libro ba? Ano to? Think of the world kuno na wala human beings. Think of a world na wala. Think kuno pag bakta kuno mo thinking kaning planet Earth wala human beings. Think of planet Earth that is not yet populated by humans. Or is it possible to think of an Earth that is not yet populated by humans? What do you think? Possible ba na? Can you think of a planet Earth nga wala yung mga human beings pang mga mananap ba? Who would say yes, it's possible to think about an empty planet Earth? Sige na. Okay, sabi mong delay. Yuso es eh. Lawom yung pamalandong dinesplikas niya tayo. Kaya na siya ng higher level of phenomenology. Dagyan na ng mga essence nga nakitaan. Pero ang question na is, unsa man yun na, unsa man, okay, pag-unsa niya pagkabalo nga mo atong content, ngayong ginauna. Right? Pag-unsa niya pagkabalo nga katong yung ginauna ang content, mao gito yung earth, nga wala human beings. Okay. Naman na kita mo mga dragons or dinosaurs, no? Hana, lava, overflow. Pero unsa pagkabalo niyo mo atong content? Unsa pagkabalo in the first place nga mao ni ang forma sa lava or dinosaur or unsay colors, right? So that is a controversy. That is a normal, the scandal of thought ba? You cannot go there if you haven't seen, if you cannot think of them, you cannot reanimate, reactualize that condition if you haven't seen those conditions first. Mo na nga, even objects cannot exist in themselves. Nagdungan ang existence ba between the human mind and the object, right? Walay gauna ingon bitaw siya. Kung walay subject nga ma-prioritize, all the more nga walay object nga maka-exist independent of the mind. Para mo na mo, atoms exist, mao ni ang forma nila. Atoms exist. Na sa una pa wala pang human beings na ni atoms. So ang pag-conceive ni mo ana nga nanay atoms wala pa human beings. Isod no kay even our conception of atoms are brought over to us or are brought over to itself through the things that we see in the lab, right? So it's impossible for this is number 5 that either an object exists without human beings or human beings exist without objects. Or, sorry, objects exist without consciousness or consciousness exists without object. Di ka makanahon ng planet Earth nga nahi dragon. Kaya, di sila makagikan na naging mong ginahon ng dragon, be. Fossils. Di sila makagikan na. Fossils are found, right? Pero makabalo kag mo nilang purma kay they were actually seen or found. I-drag ko na ng idea sa Ginoo, be. I-drag ko na ng phenomenological description or picture with a divine experience. Nagaya ko ng theological challenge. That gives us a challenge, di ba? Kay, we say God exists, but yung challenge, philosophically speaking, is it even possible to conceive of an existence of a God? Kaya yung manaunaan ba yung pirme, kay dili ba ayaw ba yung manaunaan kay mga magnified images ba di ba? Very human. So, overflowing grace, and yan ay mga picture. Pero muna pag nakita na ka Niagara Falls, or waterfalls ba, di ba? See, the challenge is actually phenomenological, and the challenge is real. If you subject that to the phenomenological inquiry, hindi ka ginoo. Be, ato po nang examine atong consciousness, be, unsa mong content sa mong consciousness? Unsa mong object sa mong consciousness whenever you speak of God? All-loving, all-powerful, creator of everything. Sa una ko answer, wala gyud ko makitaan. Makita na go kay picture, images nga nas TV, nas imbahan, na, pero lisod, right? Lisod magamag description ba? Mao na nga sa Europe or in the West, mao ba nang daghang kay tabitaw kita mga Katoliko kay daghang kay ostentations kana bitaw mga santos di ba sin ba nya nga atong deduction kay toward the unseen, right? But then the way we logically travel is that we start with the things that we can see and assume that there are other things we cannot see but really exist. Not right? Ano ang Katoliko ba? mao po na according to my mentor, mao po na beauty o problem sa Catholic faith. Ano naman, i-jump bitaw ka, ano ba yan eh? Okay, mo na the limits sa ito magitaan, right? Pero mong gi-assume beyond the limits nga na-exist siya. Ano ba? And we cannot call that knowledge. In Soren Kierkegaard, that's faith, right? Dawat ka ba? Naalagi naman, gamble. Kung kang kuhan pa na, kang katong, isa tong gamble nga philosopher. Ito itong, mo gamble, if you believe, pero walay Ginoo. If you believe, niya wala, if you believe na Ginoo, mas maayo. Okay kayo ka, if you believe walay Ginoo, kansi ka, right? If di ka mo believe, walay Ginoo, walay mawala mo. If you don't believe, pero may Ginoo, problema kayo, di ba? So, saan na nag-gamble? Kanang po ito bang medieval nga or modern nga philosopher? Anyway, so the idea there is that kanang sa theological language, lisod na kayo ang mudrag kag philosophical discussions or phenomenological description to theology, you need a certain amount of faith. If not, interpretation, exegesis. So, dili na siya about being of God, but understanding or our interpretation of the existence of, our understanding of the presupposed existence of a God, right? So, mo nang itawag na like exegesis. So, it's not possible to arrive at a notion of God in a phenomenological way. Otherwise, ang imong deduction na from seen to unseen. Mabuto na masaya mo. Uyan ang magsimba kayo, wala magkakanan na kayo na discussion. Magwali daw na, puro mga graphics ba? Malani ba? Sumbingay. Kan kita po sumbingay kayo. Mas maayo pa yung musimba tang walay-wali. Ay, bitaw? Wala mo na musimba nga, mas maayo pa yung musimbang walay-wali kasanay wali. Kung dati na utang musimba, ganahan itong musimba nga walay-wali kasanay. Kaya mo na, ay, makitaan mo, yan, yung wali. But the language is phenomenology, di ba? I-describe niyo muna, di ba? Mga analogy, mga pasumbingay, ano. Pero we all know in the classroom at this level, and there are limitation of phenomenological descriptions, right? Kung saan ko mo describe na, kabalo ba, kung saan ko, shut up na lang, babe. So, nagpangalawat, kung saan ba lang, refertory. Pero, okay raw. Paano, basta, mo na nga, nindot nga kanang attitude that I think dili na kayo ng deep theological language kay siguro ang nindot na ng approach kay social engagement na lang ba magwali mo parang ko na expound pa mo niya Ginoo ayo na lang social engagement sa may mga pang daog-daog din sa inyong parokya sa may kay mo na ganahan sa Ginoo dili na daw ingon daw nga mao ni ang Ginoo mo ni ganahan sa simbahan. Simbahan, active ta, yan mo engaged ta mga injustices, mga problema. Ayun na, describe too much ng Ginoo kay di kapalo na jud kang naagi na dead end ba. Giving 11. But you can also argue that way when you are asked about thesis number 5 sa Compre, right? So number 5 is the limits of phenomenological description. Kutob lo yung object nga may encounter sa mga consciousness. Kanang imong gi-assume nga wala nang encounter, alive na theology na siya. Yeah, that's Husserl. Husserl pa na, pero eventually kining may mga I am the disclosure of the reality, the question kay in being and time, ang ni-pitch kita ng question about the meaning of being was Heidegger. Mo nang iya hermeneutics, di ba? Ang iyang goal was the interpretation of the meaning of being. But kanang unong interpretation of the meaning of being is only possible because there was a being that questions it. So ang being that questions it is actually what enables seeing. And the being that questions that is Dasein. Right? Or Dasein because it's German. But also Dasein because Heidegger preferred not to use man. Instead, he used Dasein. Kaya naman, ang human magod or ang man na concept presupposes siya deep metaphysical nga essence ba? Nga dili na gini mo ma-encounter. Wanang instead, gibuhat nga Heidegger Dasein. Kay Das means there, right? Das means there. Sein means being. So there being. Human being to know is something that avoids this definition. Human being mongod kay was known to be rational animal, right? Yan ang gi-avoid nun siya nga. Instead of der Mensch, which is man, mo gigamit ni Nietzsche, di ba? Der Mensch, das ist was man to know is something that you have to overcome. Der Mensch, das ist was des overburdened burden soul. Something that you have to overcome. Manang na Ubermensch, right? The overcoming of the self is the making of a Superman. By overcoming limitations ba, may mga Ubermensch. But Heidegger did not use that. Instead, he used the term Dasein. Ang man ko na is there, labay dire, being. So thrown into the world. Being in the world, thrown into the world without essence. Yes.
Is the concept of Dasein under Heidegger was closely related to the problem of traditional ontology, which is I guess it was from the self and the I. So our question is, sunod ba mga nagsulat sa I or sa ang klase with Martin Heidegger ni Sir Ibanez, it's also one the importance of the other Dasein for the discovery or the unveiling of the meaning of the existence of the Dasein.
Okay. Because Heidegger speaks about Mitsein, right? Mitsein, di ba? Dasein with. Mit means with. Yeah, Sein. Mit Dasein. With other Dasein, di ba? Katong iyang I'm familiar with that. Kaya ako among tong PowerPoint yung gigamit katong Heidegger na PowerPoint o katong syllabus. So, familiar ko katong iyang projection of being in the world means thrownness, being at hand, Dasein, being Dasein alongside with another Dasein, but that is an offshoot to his discussion of care, right? Kaya kanang Dasein kuno, we realize that we are thrown into the world. Also, we realize that we can be out of this world, right? And we now start to care for the self. And when we realize that there exists another Dasein who also can fall into the same possibility, we now start to extend this care to meet Dasein and project not anymore care but concern. So, care is a fundamental property, Dasein, fundamental essence of Dasein, care for the self. But if you now start to extend that care to your classmates or fellows, you now show concern for them. So, care for self, concern for others. But mo na gitawag niya meet Dasein. Dasein alongside with other Dasein. It's a consequence to Dasein's realization that of his possibility for non-existence. But when it comes to truth, Heidegger confines aletheia to something which is really very personal to Dasein. Kaya murag naman natin sa kawang kuhan siguro. Since I mentioned na, I think murag mo na gigamit ni Sir Ibanez. Siliman. Ha? To? Ani? Ubermensch is kuhan mo na siya. Recovered files ako dito. Kaya Kani, mo na yung gigamit sa inyo, ha? Kuha ni Gika. Kini? Mo ni no? Kini?
Okay.
Kuha ni Gika. Kining hato ni. Kini. Existential quality of Dasein there. A kind of being which belongs to Dasein, never to but again, that is kini man siguro napasabot ninyo ani oh. Dada. Kining being in as existential, right? Kining to reside, right? To dwell. But also, as a fact, right? Facticity. And then third is kining thrownness. And then fourth is kane, involvement and significance. Mo siya. So, pero look, what Heidegger did was just, he did not define the human being. He describes it, right? He described niya bang ang Dasein, who is me, right? Myness, right? Is thrown, is a fact, right? But at the same time, it involves with other Dasein. So instead nga ingon siya nga we are rational being, which is very abstract and kanang pathetic. Ingon siya nga we are facts. We are thrown into the world. Yes, we are facts, but then we are capable of engaging. So walay Ginoo na involved walay description of a God ba. He just describes the human condition, right? And then eventually, kining sabihin ang time nun siya nga, kini siguro pasabot ninyo. Kanang involvement and significance means being with others, right? That is what the meaning is all about. Okay. So motto, being with others, mana. Okay. I think we have to stop there. Okay. We only can stay until chapter 5 kay